continuing our discussion of different groups in American history and what they've faced as far as rights go in U.S. history. So this lesson is going to focus on workers. That's what it means by labor. So we're looking at what people have had to do in the workplace to secure certain rights that we have today. You might not think of the workplace, especially if you've never had a job, you might not think of the workplace as a place where rights come up or where rights need to be fought for. But there is a lot of stuff that you guys all know about, like vacation, for example. That was not always a normal thing. Or weekends off, that wasn't always a normal thing. So what we're going to look at is where workers kind of started out as far as their rights went, and we're going to look at how that evolved and what they did to try and gain different rights. So again, we're continuing our discussion of how we can use rights to change things, to fix things that we see as wrong. So our objective is to describe historical roles of labor unions and how they change conditions for workers in the 19th and 20th centuries. And our central question is, how did working conditions change as a result of labor unions? So we're looking at what happened when people who had a similar job kind of banded together or got together and tried to change something they didn't like about their job. So what are some of those things that they didn't like too much? Well, as far as like going to work and how we see that in our society today, that wasn't always a normal thing. A lot of people used to just work out of their house. Maybe they had like a sewing business or something like that, or maybe they lived on a farm and that was their job. As far as like leaving your house and going to work, that didn't become like a really normal thing until like the 1890s. So before that, yes, people went to work. There's a lot of people that did that in the 1840s, but it doesn't become like a normal thing, like you wake up in the morning until the 1890s, when the United States starts to become more of an industrial power. So what were those conditions like? They had to work usually 7 days a week, so you didn't get a day off. If you were lucky, you got Sundays off so you could go to church. You worked 12-hour days. You had no vacation, compensation for injuries. So what that means is if you got sick, if you need to take a break, too bad. If you got hurt, too bad. All of these things that we have today did not exist then. If you missed a day for any of these reasons, you aren't going to get paid. Nowadays, in most places, if you get hurt or injured on the job, you can't just stay out of work, but you can get compensation for that injury. Accidents were very common because things were incredibly dangerous. There weren't any standards for what a business or factory or warehouse needed to look like and how it needed to operate. So they could be very, very dangerous, and a lot of accidents happened. When I say accidents, I don't mean paper cuts. I mean losing limbs, breaking bones, or for long hours and meager pay. Think about a 2-year-old that you know, or a toddler that you know, and imagine them going into work in a factory. It happened. So you can see that workers didn't like all this stuff too much. So a lot of them started to form labor unions, which are groups of people. They usually have a similar job, and they try to get together and protest things to try and change things that they don't like. If they see something as abusive from their employer or their boss, they'll try and get it changed. I'll give you an example of just what it was like to be a worker then. There was this place in Chicago. was a company. It was called, outside Chicago. It was called the Pullman Palace Car Company. Before cars, railroad was the main way that people got around. So people that owned railroads were very, very rich. When I say rich, I mean rich. They controlled the railroads in the country, and they made a tremendous amount of money on it because it was the main way that people got around. The Pullman Palace Car Company, they called it car because that's what you called like the cars on the railroad. The individual like parts of the train were called cars. The guy that owned it, his name was George Pullman. The company was named after him. He had over 6,000 workers. Now, if you worked for the Pullman Palace Car Company, you had to live in a town. They call it company town. And the guy Pullman owned that town. So if you wanted to work there, you had to live in the town, and a lot of people had no choice. If they wanted to have a job, that's where they were going to get a job, because he was such a big employer in the area. He charged rent 25% higher than other areas. So if you want to work there, not only did you have to live in his town that he owned, but he charged you incredibly high rent. This is a political cartoon. Actually happened. It's a political cartoon supposed to show like symbolism and supposed to show you kind of what things were like. So you can see the big guy there. He is Pullman, and he's portrayed as a large man to show his power and his wealth and how rich he was. And you can see that he's crushing or twisting an employee. You can see an employee on the arm there of the man being crushed. And that man is being crushed by low wages, or his low pay, and high rent. Those two things are not good for this man, for this employee, and making his life not very good. He doesn't have enough money he has to pay so much money for rent that he doesn't have enough money for other things. So what do they do to try and fix all this? Let me move this over so you guys can see it. There you go. Well, they have a strike. Strike is a refusal. So basically a lot of people got together and decided we're just not going to work. To show that we're not happy about what's going on, we're going to stop working. This way, Pullman's going to see how much he really needs us. So they strike, and it ends up being a nationwide strike. A lot of railroad workers around the country decide that they are not going to work. It would be like, imagine if nobody could drive on roads today. That's the impact that would have. That's how important railroads were. So they do this to try and show how important they are and to try and get things changed. Strikes are something that's going to happen a lot during that time period, and they still happen today. Whether they're legal and what happens to people that strike depends on where you work. And if where you work allows a labor union, not everywhere, but some places do. Just because there isn't a labor union in a place that you might work does not mean that you're not going to have rights. You can still stand up and talk about rights that you think you should have, and there's still laws that every employer or boss has to follow, even if there isn't a labor union. Labor unions and all these workers get done during that time period. Just like do persuade the government to legalize the 8-hour workday. It means if you work for 8 hours. If you work more than 8 hours, wage, for example, is something that comes about because of all of this. Child labor laws get passed that say that children have to be certain ages to work, and they need to be going to school rather than working at the age of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Safe working conditions, this was the big one. We talked about how dangerous things were. There's a lot of standards that are put in place to make sure that where people work is much safer to avoid injury. Minimum wage, like we talked about, and better labor practices. So you can see these two pictures here. You see what a factory looked like before all of this and during, and then and the other picture is what a factory looks like today. You can see some major differences between things. In the top picture, you can see kids who are working with machines. Safety equipment. It doesn't seem like it's too clean in there either. So disease and injury were probably something that happened pretty easily. That's more what a factory looks like today. These people are wearing safety equipment, they're wearing gloves, they're wearing noise canceling headphones to block out whatever's going on in that factory. I guess it was very loud. If you look, they have things that can cover their mouth. They're wearing aprons, and the clothes that they're wearing protect their skin and the clothes that are underneath of them. So all of this stuff was done because of labor unions. Please make sure you answer the questions underneath this video. If you don't have any questions, good luck.